women working in male-dominated industries or in what they would call unconventional roles. When we interviewed them, that's what they wanted to talk about. They didn't want to talk about how excited they are to be driving a big truck. They wanted to talk about, well, this is good, but my family won't talk to me any longer. But that's a part of the story. It's not the whole story. In order to do this, you might have to compromise that.
Welcome to Ore-atory. I have a very, very special guest with me today. I have Michelle Hone, who is a strategist in sustainability and social performance. And she's a certified transformational life coach and the founder of GEMS Unearthed, which we will be talking more about today, which is a global anthology showcasing stories from women across the mining sector. So in this episode, we're going to explore a whole lot of stuff, but it's essentially going to talk about the intersection of mining, storytelling, leadership, and Michelle's journey that led her to create a project that's really capturing what I would like to refer to as the human side of the industry. So without further ado, Michelle, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Really delighted to be on your podcast.
Well, and, between me, you, and whoever listens, this is your very first podcast. So I feel very humbled to have the opportunity to get you on here.
Yeah, like better late than never, I guess, right? Seems like a strange time in technology history for it to be a debut, but it is.
Well, there's a first for everything, so we're going to have a great time.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And no one I'd rather be doing this with, so thank you.
Well, thank you. So I think our tipping point where I would like to start is sort of your backstory. So you have worked in the mining industry for nearly 30 years and have this very rich and colorful background in sustainability and communications and ESG. But how did you wind up in mining? Because it is always a good story. So I need to hear yours.
Sure. Well, it certainly wasn't by design. I would say it was completely by accident. At the time, I was a licensed financial advisor. And this was in the days of like Briex and Voisey's Bay, and where like the word closology, or just being somewhere in the vicinity of, some kind of discovery or deposit, was making a lot of people a lot of money. But the thing was, the brokers that I worked for, they were more like bond and mutual fund kind of guys and, blue chip stocks with dividends. And so they saw this flurry of resource requests as a bit of a hassle. And so I was the one who was sort of assigned to deal with the fast and furious inquiries and trading in the junior resource sector. So that's sort of where I focused while I was on the financial side of the industry. And then it was one of our regular clients, actually, who had said, well, hey, would you like to come over and work with one of these junior companies? And so I did just that. So I moved into, depending on who it is and at what time, I called it the dark side then, but I'm like, wait a minute, we're already in the dark side. Or
Which dark side was it?
That's right. Yeah, but the investor relations side of a junior resource company at that time. So, and I had, it's Vancouver based. So there was, just hundreds at that time and thousands now of, junior exploration companies based in Vancouver. And so you would, just kind of move around, and it would, be with this group and this deal and this group and this deal, and sort of moved around in that space in investor relations and corporate communications for about not quite 15 years, maybe 10 or so years, right? Where just, increasing responsibility, a little bit more focused on corporate governance, was in an officer position kind of at the culmination of that. And then I was just like, oh, I'm done. I'm just done with, promoting these junior mining companies. So I decided to get my master's in communications so that I could just become a generalist and get out, go do something different. Yeah. And then when it was time to do my master's thesis, I was like, wow, like I know a lot about rocks.
All of a sudden, I've gained this knowledge.
And, looking at all my contacts, talking about doing your thesis research, lean on your contacts and your network. And all my network are people who know about rocks. And so at that time, corporate social responsibility was really very nascent at the time. It was really just making its debut. And so I thought, well, geez, maybe I can keep all of my knowledge about rocks and the people that go with that. I can stay in the sector, but just shift my focus to just something different, right? Just something that looked like maybe it was a bit more values based, than what I was doing, working with social aspects, environmental aspects. And yeah, so that's how I got into the sustainability side of the work, which I've been doing for about 15 years now, sustainability and social performance advisory.
Well, then you have this whole other side where you get to deploy a different sort of skill set. So you started leaning in on the master's in communication, but you've been a writing facilitator, life coach, editor. And so those are really creative and also lean on that personal development sort of side. And so how did all of that become incorporated and start shaping your professional path?
Yeah, for the first while, I kept everything really private, right? Like it was sort of like the two sides of Michelle. So it
Right?
was like, this is what I did by day. And then I would have these personal interests, which, we all do, right? And the worlds don't always collide. But I think it was around the time that I started taking, so I did become a registered therapeutic counselor, and I was a counselor. I had a private practice from 2019 to about 2024, which coincided really well with COVID and,
Yeah.
large mental health concerns. But it was really with that training that I realized that alongside like organizational coaching, which is, really what you're sort of doing on the
Yeah.
sustainability side, that you can also focus on and embrace the more individual human element. And so really what the counseling work allowed me to do, I think it enhanced my stakeholder engagement skills. Just generally my interactions and my insights I found got a little different, a little more counselory. I got a little more leany backy and listening,
I like it.
right? And just like listening more and processing a bit more. So like my negotiating skills, overall problem solving and communication, I think just really enhanced through that. So yeah, just that's where I kind of allowed my worlds to collide.
Yeah.
Right. The coming out of psychological health and safety and ISO 45003 really helped me marry those worlds in a way that made sense instead of
Yeah.
me kind of being, having these bipolar careers. Right. You have like sustainability and social performance consulting meets psychological health and safety. And so that just seemed to make a great deal of sense where it previously hadn't. Right. So yeah, I think that really helped. And I'm now able to, I don't have to compartmentalize those worlds anymore. I think most people who get to know me, they just know, okay, she's a curious cat and she is going to be very interested in you, not just what you do.
I try to be that way as a recruiter. I always say that we're social workers for the upwardly mobile.
That's great.
And I always laughed at it. And God, like joke, but he was a social worker when he started. And so he sort of married that into the role of recruiter. And in being shaped and trained by him for what I do, it inherently became part of what I got to do. People are interesting, right? They are the best, most difficult part of what we get to do every single day. So I absolutely see how these two things are intertangled in your world and why one would make you great at the other. But then more recently, you've sort of tapped into this new creative pursuit, GEMS. Let's talk about GEMS a little bit. And so you sort of put these two together, leaning on the human side and your background and everything that you're doing in communication and writing. And so GEMS was born. So voila.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a lot more of a kind of a slow lead in as opposed to an aha moment, right? So, you spoke about my expressive writing facilitation, which I was sort of doing in private on the side. The groups that I focused on were, I did a lot of loss and grief work, both for, loss of people, but also for beloved animal companions, because I found that there was a real kind of gap there in terms of support for losing family member who was a pet. So I did that work for a while. And then also like just general journal, like how to integrate journaling into your self-care and using some expressive writing techniques that way. But it was really through a project called My Mother's Story, which is exactly how it sounds. It's writing stories about moms. It was through that process that I really learned how interesting every single woman is and their story subjects. And, don't get me wrong, there's some people's lives who are hugely plot driven, right? They have these exciting events and suspenseful things happen to them. But even with character driven stories, like every person who thinks they're ordinary, it's like, trust me, you have extraordinary moments and challenges and obstacles and successes, these really relatable details, right? And so I was just captivated, I just hooked, I'm just addicted to this now, right? So it was sort of back then where I realized that that depth and breadth of storytelling was something really unique that we should really try to capture in mining. So that was over 10 years ago that I had started thinking about that. And then also I did a company I consulted for in Bolivia, and we actually did a study at their mine site on women in unconventional role. So, culturally, women working underground, women working in mining, women driving the bulldozers and the big Tonka trucks, probably less difficult organizationally, actually, because management was starting to get the hang of how good they were at these jobs and how well they treated the equipment and how the health and safety stats had improved and things like that. However, culturally, women working in male dominated industries or in what they would call unconventional roles, when we interviewed them, that's what they wanted to talk about. They didn't want to talk about how excited they are to be driving a big truck. They wanted to talk about, well, this is good, but my family won't talk to me any longer because I've broken out of this traditional path, or what that meant for how that impacted their ability to have a family or to be there for their family as a mom or as another family member. And that's what they wanted to talk about. They didn't want to talk about work. So I'm like, oh yeah, we're on to something here. Yeah. It was around that same time that the word unearthed really stuck. So it's like GEMS Unearthed. It's sort of double entendre on gems in the mining sector, but women being these brilliant, beautiful gems, but also like the unearthing process, because that's kind of where the women would find out that they did have something to tell, peeling back these layers. And really, that's where the magic was in this unearthing process. If we fast forward to more recent times, that call started getting louder last year. And I thought maybe it's time for GEMS. Really wanted something like everything all in one place. We have different write-ups, different awards, different videos, different series of profiles, all in different places. And I don't even know where they all are. Sometimes I'll just trip over them by accident and find them. And they're all great. They all have a value. But I was thinking, I just really want a one-stop shop and something dynamic and accessible. And so here we are at the launch of GEMS Unearthed.
Well, I think it's coming at a really beautiful time because I think there are so many incredible women in the mining industry specifically, and that's where I get to spend all of my time. And so perhaps I'm biased. Part of what I have recognized, as you likely have, is that we have so many high level contributors and they wind up getting burnt out. They wind up getting sort of into a position where they have grown immensely professionally, but perhaps their personal lives have taken a hit, or, vice versa. They make different choices and start their own businesses so that they don't have to do the corporate hustle. And so I've seen this wave of female entrepreneurship as it relates to mining really in the last 2 years because they were burnt out and said, like, I'm just going to do something different at this point. But I think that having employee resource groups, having opportunity to go talk to other women, whether it's Stamina or WIM or all of the other groups that are out there, having a resource to go and reflect and be creative and write and understand the magic and beauty, and that you don't have to compartmentalize professional versus personal. It's a beautiful blur if you allow it to be. You think that GEMS brings all of that to front and center. And so I love what you're doing. And I think really is necessary. And you and I in the back, or I guess in the green room, had talked about sort of feeling bad about investing in ourselves in this way, either personally or how could we step away from our professional responsibility to go and do something like this. But sometimes it's like the most refreshing, energizing thing that we get to do all year. And so I really think that GEMS could be that for so many people. And so I'm very excited that you're doing this.
Thank you so much. I'm really hoping that, as we roll out and as we have more of these conversations, that it is seen as more of contributions to literature, its contributions to legacy, its contributions to a resource of education of what all these women are doing across the sector. It's more of a legacy type project as well, right? For the next generation of women in mining. We can talk about it later, but as a sustainability consultant, know how an initiative or a program like this can creatively and innovatively tick some boxes in some of these standards and reporting and performance standards and requirements. So it's a bit of a win-win for organizations to be able to provide something for their employees, which intrinsically gives that permission.
Yeah.
If you've got GEMS in lunchroom 2 today, that alleviates that, well, we can't pull her away from her desk for that,
Right.
or has sort of kind of like it's writing, so it's fluffy. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm really wanting to get it out there and that is substantive and it is a lot more than that. And hopefully it represents a lot more than that.
Like, I have two things that I'm sort of thinking about that I hear so much about from my clients, specifically consulting groups, is that the ability to communicate, specifically for our younger workforce, women, men, doesn't matter, but the ability to write, the ability to communicate in person, face to face, all about outward facing stuff, sort of been lost a bit. And I think that COVID certainly changed how they were taught it, but how they had to deploy those skills on a day-to-day basis as well. And so when I'm asked to go find somebody, they need to be able to write, they need to be able to communicate. And so this also unearths that a bit too, because all of a sudden they have a workshop, they have somebody like you that has been through all of this and says, like, listen, we're going to tap into both your personal human side as well as the work side. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this isn't so hard. This isn't so scary. We have a new skill set. And then I guess the second part that I was going to mention is that outside of the communications and writing skills, a lot of what we're talking about here from a personal story arc can be transferred into telling that story better for the companies we work for, and they desperately need it. And so, I mean, how many mining websites do you go on and says, like, this is the beauty of what we're doing? They're saying we are a copper company and we have projects here, there, and wherever. Not that like, hey, copper does all of these amazing things for the world and it's a necessary component of what we're doing. So storytelling across the board and giving people permission to access that creative piece, I think, goes into a lot of really cool areas. And so I think it is very, very tangible. So those are my two like random aha moments that just came up. So
No, agreed. And I think what's fascinating, there's this fascinating juxtaposition, right, between the importance of storytelling from like literally biblical times, right? Versus the day-to-day, okay, we're going to make space for that and we're going to make room for that and we're going to keep telling stories.
yeah, giving us the permission to go into some more of these human sides. Like I think that the workforce after millennials and the younger demographic really is requiring that we be more human centric, that we have more values-based work for them, that they feel like they're contributing, making a difference, and really growing in lots of these ways. And so leaning into some of this stuff, I think is going to be increasingly more important for companies to spend time and money on, not just necessarily personal endeavor. And I think it warrants both. But if companies are willing to sponsor this sort of thing, sometimes that takes that guilt, because like I said previously in the green room, sometimes we find it really difficult to invest in ourselves, to give ourselves the permission, like go spend the time, go spend the money to go do this course or this workshop. But if companies are doing it, it gives a whole lot of purpose for some of the young individuals that have joined and gives them different skill sets. So, I'm really appreciating a lot of these things, but I want to kind of get back to some of the questions that I desperately want to ask you. And so what does that really mean to you? And why do you think it's missing from so many industry narratives?
Yes, I think we've covered a little bit of this, but just to dig a little bit deeper into it. So I'm really talking about the whole person and the level of detail about a person's life that goes beyond just what they do at work. Of course, their performance and what they do, their role in either their company or maybe their role is a bit bigger and they are actually shaping part of the sector in a higher leadership role. But that's part of the story, right? It's not the whole story. And so really wanting to get more fully into women's life, whether that is family, spirituality, community, what women are doing and who they are when they're not at work. And that sort of goes both ways in terms of how that enriches their life and makes them better at work versus there's also trade-offs, compromises, things that are really challenging about that. And just, just not turning it into a laundry list of complaints by any stretch of the imagination, right? But just like, just kind of some factual recognition, right? Like in order to do this, you might have to compromise that, right?
Yeah.
Like we can't, this sort of superwoman, you can do it all. I think it might have taken a global pandemic for everyone to shake it out. That was like not really a realistic expectation, right? So there are compromises and trade-offs. And so I also want to convey in these stories what women want to tell the next generation of women in mining, right? So what's their message? This isn't a memoir. It's not an autobiography, right? It's sort of a snippet in time, and use your career and that timeline as milestones to tell that story and to reinforce that story, right? And just recognizing women as not just professionals, but leaders, caregivers, community members, decision makers that influence far outside of the workplace. Yeah. And the other thing that I really am hoping to get across in GEMS is that it is open and accessible to all roles, all companies, all geographic locations. We're not really, we have lots of initiatives that capture sort of the high achievers and the high performers and the upper echelons. And I'm hoping they participate too. Like, I'm not, I want them in too. But we also want to just represent a full spectrum of all of the different kinds of positions that might be available, or roles, or maybe how you can move laterally. Before I got into mining, I had no idea. Like, I thought, okay, well, if I'm not a geologist or an engineer, what am I going to do? And I think that's still a very common way of seeing the sector if you're on the outside looking in.
Well, and I think something that I recognize often, and something that I was hoping to break the mold on, which was a bit of a lofty goal, I have to admit, was that through this podcast, we would have conversations that wouldn't be so mining centric, that perhaps we would break that silo and talk to people outside of mining and allow them to see, like, this isn't a dirty industry, and that it's not, like, it's just so demonized in some respects. But we have so many really fascinating people that got into the industry, as you did, sort of on accident or by happenstance, and as I did. And I think that part of the thing that I told myself early in my career was that I even wrote a story about through a coach that I used early on to kind of like figure out how to do public speaking that I was terrified of. And he said, like, Lindsey, all of the things that you thought were working against you were part of the differentiators that helped you to get to where you are today. And so part of that for me was recognizing that because I was non-technical, because I wasn't a man, because I had less than 20 years of experience at that time, that was sort of my superpower. And so, as you said, like, humanizing some of this, it allows us all to recognize that we all have a very different journey, but that is the part that makes us unique. And that allows us to find jobs, find people, find resource groups, tell our story, all of those remarkable things, and be us. And I think that that is sort of like the superpower. And it took me going through that personally to be able to say, like, I don't need to have my personal journey locked up and my professional journey, like, be this very sterile version. And in my work, I try to encourage individuals to write an objective statement or an early portion of their resume, or just say, like, what is it that gets them excited, right? A sample of their writing. It's a sample of who they are. And it's the best part of their resume from what I can say. So I can read my resumes and say, okay, you have a degree, you did X years here, there, whatever. But, like, I want to know about you and how you'll function with this team. And so you're sort of helping me get that out of them and give them permission to do that in a very, very different way than I can. And so, that humanization and being able to figure out what that arc really means at any given point, because your elevator pitch for any job, people will remember you, and that you have 6 horses in Montana versus that you worked at Newmont or something like that.
Right.
So I think it's just really, really interesting that we all have this moment, perhaps, where we try to block and segment our lives. And I think the further I get in my career, the more blurry those lines become.
It's true. I agree. You just get a little bit more relaxed about the blur.
Absolutely. And so you sort of started talking to us about what the story creation process looks like. But how do you really support people in finding that voice? Because I think that's probably where you have some magic. I mean, certainly you had me sing the green room before this, not all kinds of stuff. So you have this really innate ability to ask really great questions and make people go internal and not just say, like, rattle off accomplishments. You get really into it. And so how are you able to do that? And what does that look like from a standpoint of being at one of your seminars or one of your workshops?
Yeah. So, I mean, I have to admit that some of it is a little bit superpower. The culmination of my experience got me here, right? So it's a little bit, my workshops tend to be We build safe spaces really quickly. We kind of get on with things in terms of not just getting to know each other and building rapport fast and feeling safe, but also getting on with the work at hand. So this is a bit of a time-tested recipe that we've done over many times. What I do is upon registration, I'll send out a kind of a pre-workshop package that not everyone has to do, but there's always people in the group who want to do. There's always ones who I want to know, I want to manage my expectations, show me what you're going to show me. And if I can start marinating on things before I get in the room to hit the ground running, give me that, right? So we have that. It's optional. Everything will still be covered in workshop. But for those people who really love that and they really get into it, I make sure I provide that for them. The first workshop is a full day workshop. The reason we have tested this over time and constructed it the way it is that particularly for busy lives, we're doing instructional exercises, expressive writing techniques to try to elicit some of these circumstances, memories, situations, working with timelines, working with values, working with messaging and takeaways, and starting to think about how the story might form. And then we actually give a couple of hours in there to write. When we do the writing exercises, time. So there's never enough time to finish. You can go back and finish an exercise that could be an element of your story. You might have a scene. You might have, for example, a character description of either yourself or another person. Literally embed that in and start your building blocks. Or do some research, do some free writing. We have not done this before. It's always can either self-reflective writing or pure biography. So for the first time, you can either write your own story, which lots of people love self-reflection. Lots of people love sorting out their own narratives and thinking it through themselves and deciding what their authentic voice is going to be. So that suits one group of people. I'm just a control freak, so I can't have anyone write my story.
I can totally understand that. And when you mentioned hey, we have this pre-work that you can do, I'm like, Michelle definitely would do that. And so would I.
Someone the other day said, Michelle, you are a very precise human being. And I'm like, oh, that's a really nice way to say that. Yeah.
I like that. I encourage my husband to use that.
Yes. Because I know what it means, but it's the nicest way ever to say that. And I've also decided that if participants want it, they can pair up, right? And so it's like, we could write, saying it was you and I, we could write each other's story. Some of that time would be for interviewing. And maybe you just need an accountability partner and get her done, right? So in between the first workshop, and then we do plan, there is a second workshop that's a half day, and it's just to regroup. It's an accountability day, and it's the time where participants can read, probably not their full story, but excerpts from their story and get feedback. You can cheerlead. When you hear other people's stories, you get really good ideas too, right? You're like, oh, I totally forgot about that. Or, not to copy their words or their life, but just like, oh, I can take that idea that inspires me to do this, and give it some unique twist. And then just cheerlead with each other, right? And the other thing that pairing up does is, sometimes I've met a lot of women who are so incredibly humble, even the most accomplished. And so sometimes it is hard to write your own brag book. Easier for maybe to interview each other. And then you have the other person say, on your timeline, well, this can't hit the editing room floor. This is really important, or this is really cool. And don't forget about this, right? Where you might downplay it yourself.
Well, and I think women are really good at that.
Yeah.
Women are very adept at minimizing some of the struggle, at, normalizing what we have to do to get to the next part. And sometimes that is the story arc, right? Sometimes that is giving yourself permission to say oh, man, I've really been through it, but now look. And that's also quite inspirational, I find. We're great at forgetting that sometimes that struggle has gotten us to where we are, or whatever it is, right? And so I think that accountability partner is really important, but also someone to see your magic, because sometimes you're unwilling to, or don't want to, or whatever it might be. But, I think that that's a really powerful thing. And same thing with recruitment. And sometimes I'll say man, you have all of these really cool things about you. Have you ever considered? And they're like, no, I haven't. And so extracting magic is the best part of it. So, but I want to talk a little bit more about what the workshop really looks like. And so it sounds like you have a few different models. And I imagine that there's sort of one that's designed for corporate use and personal use and half day, full day. But like, what do these look like? Or is that still kind of taking form? And I imagine that that'll kind of have various iterations as you go forward. But what could somebody expect if they decided to come join you?
Yeah. So I think right now they're going to be similar because, like I said, they're time tested. So regardless of whether it's sort of a mixed group and like our Vancouver group on February 4th, it's just, whichever women can make it from multiple companies, organizations, really, really lovely mixed group. I don't think I would deliver the workshops any different if I was in-house at a mine out in wherever. Right. So the content is going to be very similar. Obviously, your conversations are going to go different ways, or maybe a particular exercise in a particular country or something like that. So the other thing I generally do is when I present writing exercises, I give options. So the structure is full day workshop. About a month or 6 weeks later, your half day workshop for your reading and accountability and feedback. It is possible to write your story in the 2-hour writing break in the first workshop. It has happened and it came out so amazingly beautiful. It was jaw dropping, but it's rare. It is rare. This was a young mom who's like, this is the only 2 hours I'm never going to have to do this. I'm doing it.
She just like, I'm going to be productive.
No, she did it. She banged out her whole story. It's actually in this book. This was My Mother's Story, the book I was referring to.
Yep.
She's chapter 2, and she wrote her entire story on the break, start to finish.
Incredible.
But that is very rare. So it's the full day workshop, then the half day follow-up. And then I actually schedule a couple of personal editing hours with myself. Not everybody needs editing, right? But I think it's just nice to, review the story because I'm the one who has the context of the other stories.
Yeah.
Right. And so, not that you want your stories the same, but you want a similar flow, a similar tone, a similar, I can expect to hear a takeaway of some kind. I can expect to hear a universal resonating theme of some kind. Right. And just, just make sure that's everything.
As a dog barks. Like, I want to tell my story. So I hope you guys didn't hear that, but
tell them that story. Yeah. And then it gets uploaded to the GEMS Global Archive. So the technology component of GEMS is still underway because it's going to be a while until we have finished stories, right? So, kind of taking our time behind the scenes. And so what that's going to be is going to be a global digital archive where people can create their own anthologies. They can create their own collections. So you might say, I want my book to be my group, the group that I wrote with, right? So either digital, hard copy. You might say, I want, when the library starts getting bigger, I want all geologists. I want everyone in Ghana. So you can literally, every single collection, every single anthology that you create is bespoke. It's unique. You could be a company, you can say, I'm going to a trade show and I want just a selection of all the positions that I can find. I want to like all the unique, one of each, please. And take that to some sort of conference or trade fair.
Well, I think it would also be a really cool thing to show like students or women thinking about joining the industry, right? And I think that saying this is how I got into it. This was my wiggly path. And like, these are stories that I can share with you. Like, it's very human. It's very tangible. It's very like, oh, I can identify with this. And that I think brings such power to going to something and putting something like this together. So I love that you can kind of like craft whatever you need at any given moment.
Because there's all kinds of anthologies like this, right? Where you have like your 20 stories, say, right? And in an ebook, the authors stay static, their stories stay static, right? And these can be very beautiful works, but that's not what I envision. What I envision is an organically growing global archive. And also, given that we have technology, people's lives change and evolve. Why can't their stories change and evolve?
Yeah.
So if you're an early participant and then you're like, wait a sec, I've changed positions and now I think this is what I want to say, well, edit your story.
Yeah.
We can't claw back all the ones that got produced into other books, but going forward, our story is now going to better align, right? So really leveraging and harnessing the available technology to be able to track that evolving nature of real lives rather than having them sort of static and unchangeable.
And we all learn and grow and change and morph into whatever's next. And I think different seasons, different chapters, right? Like, it's you could have an early one where you just got started. You could have midlife where you've got a relationship or kids or dogs or whatever, and that complicates things and it changes that. Like, I love the evolution. I was talking to somebody the other day that was a reference for someone. They said, listen, the part that I have to remind myself of is that while I went to university with this person and we had our first 5 years of career together, and like we touched base for a very brief time at a consulting group, it's still 20 years later. And so while I remember this person like I did at university, like they've evolved. And so the story that they told around this person was really, really remarkable. And I thought, it takes a lot of thought and deliberate action to recognize that we've all grown. And sometimes we don't give that to ourselves. And so I really like the idea that you can go back and sort of revisit who you were and then write it again for who you are today. And so I think that's a really cool thing to do. And you could even have an anthology of your own stories, or just a very short story, perhaps. So I know it's very early, but you've sort of had this project work before, but do you have any specific stories or moments in the project that have sort of stayed with you or surprised you?
Yeah, early days. So the project story is not too deep into those yet. But I think the thing that has really surprised me most, like it shouldn't surprise me, but it did, is when I'm approaching more women than companies. The companies are thinking about things, how do we work this into our sustainability programming or our budgeting? But when I approach the women for, say, the mixed group, where I'm approaching individuals, the number of women who are like, oh, that's fantastic. I love it. Have you heard of so-and-so? Right? Lindsey should write her story, right? Or have you talked to WIN-BC? Now they want to tell me all these organizations that they know that would be on board. And I'm like, well, I was actually asking you.
Yeah.
And so the feeling that, I have nothing to tell. I'm not WIM 100. I didn't make a discovery. I'm not a household word. I'm not worthy of a story. I'm just like, trust me, everyone is interesting. Just, trust me. So it was from that I actually created what I'm calling a nomination badge feature. These women said, well, have you heard of this person? I was like, well, would you care to nominate them? So that would mean they would receive, like literally a nomination badge with your name. And if you'd like a little message as to why they should participate. And I'm pretty sure their first question back is going to be, well, are you writing? If you're nominating me, are you writing? Yeah, right. Yeah, to just sort of honor that genuine expression of support and empowerment for women, even if it's not for themselves, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, just to recognize that. And I also think it would be fun to receive something like that. And like you were saying before, like flattering, right?
It's hugely flattering that someone, somebody that's thinking of you and saying your name in a room that you're not a part of yet, like that's such a powerful form of recognition that I think we sometimes need, right? I mean, life is busy and we stay going, 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 but to have that moment where you're like, oh my goodness, someone thought of me to do this. Like,
Someone thought of me. Right?
Yeah, it's huge. And so, I see so much burnout. I see so much go, go, go. That moment of stillness, of recognition, I think just goes such a long way. So I love the nomination badge. And I think generally, as women are terrible at promoting themselves on occasion, we are great at promoting one another in many, many ways. And so saying like, oh my gosh, I have like 5 great people or whatever ideas for you. Like the ripple effect of this, I think will be huge. And that nomination feature just gives them a really lovely way of saying like, hey, I'm thinking of you.
And I mean, men have asked how they can support. They can certainly nominate. If you're in a company and you're in a decision-making, sort of position, you could nominate and sponsor, eligible for professional development reimbursement. So even if you don't have critical mass to bring an entire workshop in-house, allow the women who are interested or encouraged to participate and fund that through the human resources professional development. Yeah, just be supportive in those ways as well. Yeah. So it doesn't have to just be the women uplifting the women. The men have asked how they can participate too, which is delightful.
It is delightful. And I'm seeing more and more of it. And I've really recognized so many great managers and allies and individuals that are out there. And perhaps it's just because we have these conversations, right? And all of a sudden create a safe space. And they're like, how can I support this? Or what can I do? Or whatever. But I've been really encouraged the last probably 2 to 3 years with so much support from men saying like, this is a really cool thing and how can we do it? So we should definitely encourage them to keep doing that because it makes us feel even more special. So, I think moving ahead, we've probably touched on it a little bit, but in terms of the takeaway, like what are you hoping that companies and leaders really take away from reading the stories?
Yeah, well, if it's okay, I'll start with the women. Who's get women? What I'm hoping for the women, I'm really hoping that they are, once they complete their story and they have all their sort of personal benefits, like I have some feels words already, like what women have, they haven't even written yet, but even just being exposed to the idea, they're like, oh, I feel like I could be seen, seen without having to perform. I feel relieved that I don't have to be the loudest or the most senior or the most polished version of myself to belong, respected for my whole contribution, safe enough to be honest, validated, connected, proud, like deeply proud, and hopeful for what comes next and what will happen with the stories. And also a little bit excited about their legacy, because this shifts the meaning of the word legacy a little bit. It's not like this necessarily a grand legacy. It's more just like even concepts, even takeaways. So I really hope that GEMS does what it purports to do, that we keep our brand promise, and that the global archive provides like global exposure, visibility, and career advancement, right? That's really what we're looking for here. And I hope that their lessons and experiences continue to help shape the sector and workplaces, perhaps pave the way for attraction and retention. And if I heard you right, it sounds like that's what the younger generation is asking for. They're saying, prove to me that this is someplace I want to be because you value this or because you're going to support me in this way. And so maybe I hadn't thought of that previously, so it may act as that kind of tool. And it's a legacy and a literature project as much as it is a gender initiative in the mining sector. And then it's like used for education, leadership, development, and cultural change. But then if I kind of go back to the organizations, the companies themselves, I hope that they read the stories. We're so used to gleaning. We're so used to highlight gleaning. This is going to be a sit down, focus, read, absorb, take it in, be present, feel it, right? So I hope they read, as I think my first hope, and that their insights and perspectives and takeaway messages are integrated, into the larger workplace culture. I want them to use the product to, like you're saying, print out books and use them to their advantage, right? To showcase and highlight their people. And I want them to take credit where credit is due. If they are doing this, those ESG and standards and reporting and performance standard tick boxes, why not? I know from working with enough companies that sometimes creating the gender-based KPIs sound good, but then you're sort of scrambling a little bit for what that means and how to walk that talk, right? So I'm hoping that they embrace that and say, okay, well, not only did we do it, but now we can tangibly demonstrate that we did something meaningful here. We meant it, right? And this is what we did. Yeah.
Well, I see such space for this. It's a recruiting tool. And so I'm laughing about it because it always goes back there for me. But, I can just imagine somebody like early stage career going in for an interview and having the company had done a workshop with you and have all these beautiful stories put into a book and like just have it waiting for somebody while they wait for the interview to start and thumb through it and say like, oh my gosh, what a really cool place to work with like such interesting dynamic women that are contributing at these levels and still have personal lives. Like this is the kind of company I want to work for. Whether that's, sort of waiting for the interview to happen or, the recruiting department could send it out in virtual form to them as well and say like, hey, this is what we're about. These are some of our values. This is how we're walking the talk. So I just see like such amazing potential for something like that as a recruiting tool or for a company to really lean on and say, we are really a cool place to be because of the people. And I think that that's really, just as you said earlier, we're being asked by people every single day, like, what's in it for me? So much so that when I coach companies to writing job description, that's part of it. Why work here? What's in it for me? Like this book could be part of that and giving the power to the individuals and the women to participate in it. In like just a little perk, right? If they choose to. So I love that. And reading. Oh my goodness, reading is a whole nother thing. Everybody's used to like 30-second clips at this point. And so, we call it popcorn brain. It's actually like a real thing. So if you are paying attention to all these short form things, your brain starts to rewire itself. And it's literally called popcorn brain. So you're able to pay attention to longer format or sit down and read and all of the rest of the stuff. And so the school that my younger son goes to, they don't allow any technology, which is like such a difficult thing to adhere to. So no iPads, no computers, no laptops, no anything until they're in 6th grade and he's in kindergarten. So he's like, that's a long time off.
That's the brain.
So they want them to be capable
Yeah.
of having an attention span. So yeah, we're working on it. So I just think reading is such an underserved situation. Like sit down and read the book.
Yeah. And I mean, these stories are so, we have in previous anthologies, we've done around 2,000 words. And, that's longer than TikTok attention spans. However, it is not so long that you can't treat anthology you create kind of like a box of chocolates, right? I'm going to pick this one today and sit down and read that one. And it would be a 10 to 15 minute read. Sort of thing. We're not putting a harsh word limit on it because, that can sometimes stifle creativity or, someone's done and we don't want them fussing about editing 300 words out or something like that. So it's not going to be harsh, but we'll let people know around 2,000 words, you can tell people more than you can imagine. It can be a really good story and it's still not sort of violating that, well, how much time is this going to take? Well, read. It's still enjoyable for levels and attention spans that are shifting.
Well, it's so well thought out. And I know that you've done this for a long time, but every time you talk to somebody that does something like this, you're thinking like, everybody knows this. And I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, look at all these gems, for lack of a better term. And one that fits, exactly with what you're doing, but all these little gems to think about how to craft this. Right. And I think I'm really excited for where this is headed and seeing some of the stories that come out of it and participating since you've invited me. And I'm not going to say no, but I will probably nominate a handful of people that I'm already thinking about as they're bubbling to the surface in the background if you haven't already asked them. But, I guess in sort of closing our conversation, I want to make sure that we appropriately give people the right places to find you so that they can either join this initiative or support it as allies in the field that might be listening to our podcast. So, where are you heading next? I know that you're doing an event in Vancouver on February 4th, but, how else can people get in touch with you and find gems?
Yeah, so right now I'm in this awkward place where my web developers are sick. So my gemsunearthed.com is like almost done.
Okay, well, there's the plug.
Right. It's almost done. So right now I do have a page, like just a, like a temporary information hub, I'm calling it, on my Akashic Communications, like my consultant spot. And I am just manually sending out, highlight information decks or one pagers or taking calls and answering questions. And for people who are registering and just doing that manually right now, I'm hoping next week everything's a little bit more slick and, sort of online ready in a place where people would recognize it. But we're starting in Vancouver because, of course, that's the closest city center to myself. And that one will be an in-person workshop. There will be virtual options available, but probably more for, those one-offs, right? Like, someone up in Alaska and someone in Prince George and someone in Saskatoon. Like, it's hard to create a solid, venue for that. But places like Toronto, London, England, Colorado, possibly Serbia, like these places are starting to gel. And so as I have critical mass, those will go up on the website in terms of, either sign me up or keep me notified of what's coming up to be able to put things in the schedule. Yeah.
And we have a really cool QR code and a one-pager that we will sort of link as this gets produced. And so, if anything changes, let me know. But you had asked previously, when is this going to air? And I don't have my air dates yet for this year. And I think the website should be up by then if you're saying next week. So, all of this will be live and everybody will know where to find you. And I have this lovely LinkedIn connection for you guys. So those of you who are listening and not watching, you can access this on all of the usual places. But Michelle's contact information, LinkedIn, website, eventually all of that stuff. And we'll have the QR code or the little scanny thing, whatever that's called these days, as I show how old I am. Like technology, all of that will be linked. And so it'll be easy to find her. And so there it is there. So I still appreciate your being here, Michelle, and doing what you're doing. I'm certainly going to participate. Like, ooh, Colorado, who could be roaching for a really fun workshop? So this is top of mind for me for 2026, because one of my things to do is to be more intentional with how I'm spending my time and how I'm actively listening. And that sounds like it's part of the workshop as well as writing. And so whether I'm listening to someone else or myself, I think that those are some things that I will certainly look forward to doing with you. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, and thank you. Thank you for being on the podcast. I'm like super proud and delighted to be here. And I know that you have the right audience. Like your people are listening to this topic. So this is a really great place to launch GEMS in the hopes that it resonates.
I think that it will. And, I will certainly be plugging it and telling people who might not even listen, that you're around and that they should be in touch with you. So, thank you for doing the work and being a resource for us and teaching us how to talk and tell stories and do all this remarkable work, and for being you and for being here today. So I'm just as delighted to have you as you might be to be here, if not more.
Yeah, it's been my great pleasure, Lindsey. Thank you so much.
Awesome.